Welcome back. Well, the fighting between Israel and Iran ramped up overnight on this day 5 of the conflict. Hundreds of thousands have hunkered down in Tel Aviv bomb shelters as more are evacuating out of Tehran. Israeli media reporting that the IDF is attacking western Iran this morning. On the heels of President Trump returning from the G7 meeting in Canada early, he left early to get back to D.C., and here's what he said from Air Force One. Watch.
Better than ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're looking for better than a ceasefire.
Emmanuel Macron had initially said that the president left so that he could oversee a ceasefire. The president said that's wrong. President Trump previously warned on Truth Social last night Iran should have signed the deal. I told them to sign, simply stated Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst. He is chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane, back with me. General, good to see you. Your reaction to what we know so far?
Well, certainly where the president is, he's supporting Israel 100% to complete the campaign that they started here. And that campaign focuses on Iran's center of gravity, their nuclear enterprise. And they want to destroy that enterprise as much as they possibly can, decapitate the leadership, and they're doing a remarkable job in doing that, and also eliminate their ballistic missiles, which is their major weapon that they're using against the Israelis. And they're making significant progress in all three of these areas, as you have noted on this show. And the president is behind that 100%. I think what is in the offing here is Israel knows full well, even though they have significant imagination and significant covert capability, they know that there's a couple of deeply buried sites that they're very challenging for them to get to with air power. And I'm assuming they would like the United States to assist them in achieving that end state. After all, the president did say he's not going to permit Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And if we walk away and leave those sites intact, then the Ayatollah will be able to achieve what he's always wanted here. The reason why he never voluntarily dismantled the program through negotiations is because he was willing to accept the airstrike, believing that he could still recover some aspect of his nuclear enterprise after the airstrikes are completed, and he would be able to rebuild that nuclear program. That is where his head is, and we've got to stop that from happening, in my judgment. Assist the Israelis in their air campaign by conducting a limited but focused air campaign on using penetration bombing to eliminate the end of that nuclear end state. And that will be a major strategic achievement. That takes off the table. Think of what it does. Takes off the table the thought of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. It reduces Iran's as a major power broker in the region. Yeah. And for the congressman to say that we've never been at war with Iran, formally, yeah, but they killed 241 Marines in the 80s. They blew up 2 of our embassies in Lebanon and Kuwait and killed hundreds more. They killed scores of our Air Force personnel in the barracks in Saudi Arabia in the 90s, and it's a documented fact that they developed advanced IEDs to focus on U.S. soldiers in the war in Iraq. Lloyd Austin, the last general we had there, estimated they killed 2,000 of us there. So this has been going on for 45 years, and we have an opportunity to take them off the table here. Well, and I think that is the right thing to do.
And thank you for that, because I also should have reminded Congressman Warren Davidson, who was just with us, all of the times that Iran has been chanting death to America, which, of course, we know. But let me get back to what you're talking about in terms of these nuclear sites, which is so important. You've said that the nuclear enterprise was spread over 12-plus sites, and you're talking about this significant one, Fordow, underground, built in the mountainside. What's the danger of upsetting that, blowing that up, and what would it require in terms of the U.S.'s participation in helping Israel get to that site?
Well, we have deep penetration bombs that can reach that site, and likely it forces a collapse on itself. By that I mean we have bombs. That site is a half-mile down with 2 to 3 feet walls, and that's pretty significant in terms of a target. But our deep penetration bombs can achieve that end. So yes, we do have the capability, and there may be some other sites that may not be as deeply buried as that, but something that Israel has struggled to complete the destruction of, that we would assist in doing it. So that's very achievable, and we're not even conducting an air campaign here. This would be a limited but focused airstrikes, maybe a couple of days involved in it, to complete the destruction. And we're very familiar with this. We've had this on our target list for years. So our people, our intelligence people, and our air power people know exactly what they're doing if the president makes the decision, to do that. And let me mention something that may be in the back of other people's minds and the back of the congressman's mind, too. This is not Iraq or Afghanistan, where we went in with a ground invasion with the purpose of conducting regime change, and we wound up also doing nation building. There's no plans whatsoever for the United States or Israel to conduct a ground invasion. There's no plans for us to physically conduct a regime change. If a regime change comes internally, it'll be Iran's choice, not Israel's, and not the United States. So we got to understand what we are really dealing with here. And will that lead to a war? Don't think so. Iran's conventional military is very weak, and they know if they attack us decisively, that our response will be overwhelming. It would be against their military targets, their economic energy targets, and their political targets. And that would likely result, inevitably, in an internal regime change taken as a result of the regime likely being destroyed in its capability to have influence over the people. The Iranian leadership understands this.
It's a really important point to make, as some Democrats in Congress are trying to reiterate what you just heard from Warren Davidson, is we're, quote unquote, we're not at war with Iran, when in fact, of course, Israel stopping Iran from having a nuclear weapon is a U.S. core national interest. You've also got Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not ruling out assassinating Iran's supreme leader. When asked about taking that action, he said it's not going to escalate the conflict, it's going to end the conflict. But there was some speculation before that President Trump reportedly vetoed an Israeli plan to assassinate the Ayatollah. General, is that the only way to get regime change here?
No, I think the regime gets so weakened and its security forces so ineffective. Look at the penetration that's taken place of Iran's security forces. The fact that we are decapitating their military leadership, much as we did with Hezbollah, is because we have people in Iran who are providing that information to the Israelis. And that is why they've been so successful at covert operations for a number of years, destroying drone plants, destroying weapons factories, killing nuclear scientists, taking out the political leader of Hamas, who was in the VIP section of Tehran, the capital city, where all the other significant leaders live, and penetrated exactly where that person was living. When they're killing these people, they're killing them in their apartments and in their homes or in their offices. They have exquisite intelligence. They can't achieve that end without having the security forces providing them some information. There's significant penetration taking place here, which certainly weakens the regime and the grip it has on its people. I don't want to go too far with that and be Pollyannish about it. I mean, these are killers and thugs, and if the people got in the streets tomorrow, they'd start shooting them, for sure. But as this regime gets weaker, as a result of the campaign that's constructed against them, it makes them certainly more vulnerable to the people rising up and to leaders around them. There's severe criticism of the regime right now by insiders. Sure. They're stunned by the decapitation of the leaders that have taken place. They're severely criticizing the civilian leadership of the fact that all the air defense systems are down and Israel is flying. Can you imagine what it's like? to
have
be in
all
Iran
that
today
airspace.
and be a leader. And you hear all of those fighter jets flying over every single day and night.
Unbelievable.
And those are Israeli fighter jets. That is absolutely the psychological and emotional impact of something like that is quite extraordinary. And the people
sure
are
is.
frustrated by this because the leaders brought this on them. And 80% of the people in Iran, are opposed to the leadership. They know they're thugs and killers, and they've been repressing them for 45 years.
Well, the air superiority that Israel has been able to take in Iran is incredible. Real quick, General, how much longer do you think this goes on? And do you think the next step or upcoming steps will be the U.S.'s help with those penetration bombs to get to the nuclear sites underground?
Well, that's the president's decision. My thought is I think he should do it for all the obvious reason we just stated.
Okay.
I think we're about halfway through maybe the target set that Israel has. In terms of the Iranians, what they've been done, there's been 10 waves of ballistic missiles in the first 24 hours, 200. On the 15th, that was the 14th. On the 15th, 105.
Wow.
Yesterday, 24-hour period, 65. So it's going down, and also the casualties are going down. So that's good news.
Yes.
And so a lot of the launches are being destroyed, and the ballistic missile stockpiles are also being destroyed.
Incredible.
So eventually, that's going to come down to something that's very negligible. As Israel continues to destroy these ballistic missiles and their launch systems.
What an incredible success from the Israeli side. General, thank you so much, as always. General Jack Keane.
Yeah, great talking to you, Maria.
And to you, sir. We'll be right back.